Comments are for general topics only. If you are here in the audience and wish to come speak up at the podium, please make sure to sign in and state your name for the record. Okay, hearing and seeing none, let's go ahead and move on to items for discussion. Item A, discussion on zoning practices. Chris?
Yeah, so we have two short videos, both from the YouTube channel City Beautiful Basics, which is a planning YouTube channel that looks at different types of histories of planning and different planning topics. And these are two short videos, one on a brief history of U.S. city planning and an introduction to land use. And it would satisfy your all's training requirement as approved in your bylaws. And so we're going to show you those. It should take about a little less than 30 minutes for both videos together.
These existed in the territory now. This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Visit the link in the description for 2 months off a premium subscription. This is a brief history of city planning in the United States, but our story begins before the U.S. existed. Prior to European settlement, cities existed in the territory now known as the U.S. Pueblo culture built impressive cities, as did the Mississippian culture. Cahokia is considered one of the largest pre-European cities north of Mexico. The Spanish were the first European power to set up shop in what is now the U.S. St. Augustine, Florida was founded in 1565. As the Spanish were founding other cities in the U.S. Southwest, they also codified one of the first examples of European planning in the New World, the Law of the Indies. The law laid out requirements for locating a new city, as well as its design and layout. Cities had to have a central square, for example, like Santa Fe. The 1600s saw the French and English join the Spanish in founding new cities, particularly along the Atlantic seaboard. New York, Boston, Charleston, and Philadelphia were all founded in this period. By the time the U.S. declared its independence, cities had popped up all over the East Coast and Southwest. Some of the larger cities, like Boston, were starting to look quite urban, while others closer to the Appalachian frontier were little more than forced to keep out the understandably unwelcoming native tribes. The founding of the United States didn't do much to create an urban nation. The Land Ordinance of 1785, which begins the gridding of the American West, was designed to create a nation of farmers. Its author, Thomas Jefferson, hated cities. To be fair, at this point, the U.S. population was 95% rural. This rural emphasis was unfortunate because shortly after the Founding Fathers signed the Constitution, which doesn't even mention cities, something big started happening. In the beginning of the 19th century, technological innovations such as the steam engine and power loom started transforming the global economy. Work that had been done by artisans in villages was now done in factories by unskilled labor. New firms and factories would locate in cities to find enough workers, and workers moved to cities to expand their options for work. Cities started to grow fast. People were moving to cities faster than housing could be built, and many of the migrants couldn't afford good housing anyway. Workers also had to live within walking distance of their factory, as no practical mass transit existed yet. Overcrowding became a serious problem. Sanitation was terrible. Human waste was typically disposed of in on-site septic tanks or cesspools. Cities smelled terrible. Disease was a constant threat. The smoke coming off the factories added to the noxious environment. It really is important to understand that the city of the mid-1800s was not a nice place to be. For many people, it was their first experience with urban living, and it was profoundly negative. Industrial cities needed reform. Disease was literally a life and death situation, so that came first. New gravity-based self-cleansing sewer systems came onto the scene in the 1840s. The implementation of a comprehensive sewer system designed to clear away waste required a citywide sanitary survey to understand the topography of the city, as well as a mapping of the cesspools, outhouses, and sources of waste. These surveys are some of the earliest acts of planning in U.S. cities, and by 1907, every major U.S. city had a sewer system. Sewers provided fresh air, and so too did some of the first comprehensive urban park systems. Some of the most notable were designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, including Central Park. Housing reform followed sanitation reform. The problem was brought to the fore by reformers and journalists like Jacob Riis, whose photos published in the book How the Other Half Lived exposed the terrible conditions people lived in during the 1880s. Tenements were claustrophobic and exceedingly overcrowded, filled with the many immigrants from Europe coming to New York by the day. The Lower East Side was almost certainly the most crowded neighborhood in the world at the time, with over 1,000 people per acre. New York's Tenement House Act, passed in 1901, required a separate bathroom in each unit, courtyards, and improved fire safety measures. Many other cities passed similar laws in the coming years. These early initiatives to fix the industrial city focused on practical social matters like health and housing. There were less than practical reformers too. Some wanted to improve the city through monuments, slum clearance, and neoclassical architecture. Let's move the timeline to 1893, the world's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago. It was known as the White City, chiefly designed by architect Daniel Burnham. The White City became a template for the City Beautiful movement, a not so good method of improving cities, but a pretty good name for a city planning YouTube channel. Most of Burnham's plans, like the one for San Francisco, never panned out, but his plans for Chicago and the Washington Mall were mostly completed as intended. At the beginning of the 20th century, city planning coalesced into a distinct profession. Its roots were in the drafting of new cities from the colonial era, the establishment of railroad towns of the West, the social reformers of major cities, and the grand visions of City Beautiful designers. These differing visions of city planning were debated at the first City Planning Conference in 1909, with the battle lines drawn between the social reformers and the technical aesthetic planners. Planners, no matter their perspective, had begun to feel optimistic about urban living. Electric streetcars were zipping through the streets, and their speed and low fares made it possible to build new housing on the periphery for the middle class, easing overcrowding. Another transportation technology changed everything. The Model T started rolling off of Ford's assembly line in 1908. Millions of the cars and millions of other cars would be sold in the next decade or two. Cars allowed people to commute further out from their homes in the suburbs, and this radically altered cities. It's a fundamental change similar to the urbanization of the last century. Most planners of the time thought that suburban development was a good thing. Cities were better than before, but what could be better than living in larger homes with greener surroundings? Enthusiasm about suburbs, combined with the poor quality of early suburb design, led to some key planning responses. First, the federal government developed a set of standard zoning and planning enabling acts that cities could adopt. These model acts gave cities the authority to do zoning, approve subdivision street layouts, form planning commissions, and adopt master plans. This added regulation and minimum standards to the development of the suburbs. Zoning ordinances were around in the 2 decades prior to the model enabling acts, promoted primarily by commercial interests, trying to protect their land value from new development that attracted immigrants and people of color. Zoning then, as it does now, can be useful or used as a tool of exclusion. But the Supreme Court, in the case of Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty, found zoning to be constitutional, and it was here to stay. Others saw the slapdash speculative suburban development and believed there was a better way. They were the garden suburb designers, notably Clarence Stein and Henry Wright. Heavily influenced by Ebenezer Howard and the English garden city designers, they developed new concepts for the suburbs that promoted shared ownership of common green space and separate circulation for pedestrians that kept them away from cars. Their most famous community was Radburn, New Jersey, built in 1929. This rapid growth outward created entire metropolitan regions, and the notion of regional planning got its start in this era. Notable regional plans and planners include Patrick Geddes and his ideas about conurbations, the Regional Plan Association of America, with Stein and Wright as members, and the publishing of the Regional Plan of New York and its environs, a landmark regional plan published in 1929. At the same time people were moving out of the city in cars, others were moving in. It was one of the most dramatic demographic shifts in U.S. history, the Great Migration. This was the migration of over 6 million African Americans from the South to northern cities from about 1916 to 1970. In the years after the Civil War and emancipation, 80% of black Americans still lived in the rural South. But by 1970, 80% lived in cities, half of them in northern cities. For immigrants, cities were a tool of assimilation and advancement. But for the millions of black Americans who moved to cities to work in urban factories, they found segregation instead. Cities during the 30s and 40s were already very different than they were at the beginning of the century. Wealthy and middle-class families were leaving for the suburbs for new tract housing, leaving behind poor and black families. At this time, most jobs in retail were still in the central city, and commuters needed a way to get back and forth. Cities started building freeways, first using state funding. To make room, they cleared poor, immigrant, and black neighborhoods, citing slum clearance and upgrading. This destruction of the city continued through urban renewal. It's a story told in 3 acts. The first is the Housing Act of 1937. This act pitted the policy of public housing activists like Catherine Bauer against commercial real estate interests who hated sharing the city with poor residents. They wanted to replace slums with flashy real estate projects. By the Housing Act of 1949 and 1954, the real estate interests had won. The public housing that did get built was intended for white middle-class families, built in demolished black neighborhoods. Middle-class whites didn't move in, and they became homes for poor black families. Those housing acts assumed that middle-class rents would pay for all of the maintenance, and they didn't provide federal funding for upkeep. When poor families moved in, the buildings quickly deteriorated without federal funding. The result was cities bereft of historic neighborhoods with bleak modernist towers in their place. It should be pretty clear that many of the planning solutions to the problems of the industrial city just created more problems themselves. It was certainly clear to those who were displaced by freeways and urban mega projects. In the 1960s and 1970s, urban residents began fighting back against top-down planning that ignored the wishes of residents and disproportionately hurt poor and minority groups. One of the most prominent early battles is also one of the most famous, the battle over the Lower Manhattan Expressway between Jane Jacobs and Robert Moses. Jacobs was an activist and journalist living in Greenwich Village. Moses was New York's master builder, responsible for the construction of many bridges, freeways, and public housing projects. He was losing influence by the 1960s, however, and Jacobs, along with other activists, managed to halt the Lower Manhattan Expressway project. Jacobs' book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, is a critique of modernist planning and urban renewal, and became one of the most influential books on planning. Jacobs wasn't the only one fighting against urban freeways and urban renewal. Residents of cities across the U.S. had had enough. Freeway construction was halted in San Francisco and Portland. New metro systems in the Bay Area, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. were built. These impressive victories could not stop urban renewal and freeway construction entirely. The federal government still provided enormous sums of money to states to build more urban freeways as fast as possible, thanks to the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. This exacerbated the exodus known as white flight, called that because for the most part, black families could not rent or own in the suburbs. Restrictive covenants, racism in the real estate profession, and redlining by banks meant that black families couldn't get mortgages, and even if they could, they wouldn't be told of listings in white neighborhoods. This proved doubly bad for black families, as now jobs were migrating to the suburbs, in some cases in what are known as edge cities. Many of these cities are only accessible by car, and located far from urban centers where black families lived. This 1-2 punch of neighborhood-destroying urban renewal and suburb-generating freeway construction began to slow down in the 1970s. Urban renewal ended in 1973. Much of the interstate freeway network had been built by the end of the 1970s, and new regulations made it much harder to build them through urban areas. The revolts against top-down planning at the beginning of the 1960s had become popular opinion by the 1970s, particularly with people hostile toward government generally in the Vietnam and Watergate eras. So-called experts were no longer trusted to know what was best for cities and people. People decided that planners didn't deserve the power they had, and there would be no more Robert Moseses. At the same time, planning academics agreed with the people and rebuked top-down planning. Marxist theorists began to explain urban growth and change as movements of capital. Planning was a tool of capitalists. Planning became a pretty lonely profession without a direction. The era of master builder was over. What would become of planners? They evolved and specialized, thanks in part to many new laws that gave planners something to do. The Environmental Protection Agency was founded in 1970, and the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Superfund Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act all made city planning much more complicated, as environmental concerns had to be considered when permitting new land uses. City planners became local experts on an increasing number of federal and state programs meant to minimize the negative impacts of new development. The Federal Community Development Act of 1974 replaced urban renewal and provided grants to communities to build and maintain a wide variety of projects, including housing, public utilities, parks, and transportation. Planners had to develop plans to apply for the community development block grants. Transportation planning changed too. The changes were slow, but transportation planners began to think about all modes of transportation, not just the car. The first bike lanes appeared in the 1970s. Cities began to invest in new light rail lines in the 1980s. The federal government began to require better regional transportation plans as well. Planners became experts in all the technical aspects of their job, but they also became educators, facilitators, and advocates. They lacked some of the raw power they had before, but still pioneered new approaches to undoing some of the harm of the previous 60 years. Some cities implemented new smart growth measures, including urban growth boundaries. The practice of Euclidean zoning began to receive pushback, criticized for its use as a tool of exclusion and its promotion of car-only development. Cities encouraged transit-oriented development in the suburbs to give residents an alternative to ever-increasing freeway traffic. Urban challenges remain today. Gentrification and high housing prices are pushing residents out of cities. Car usage is still incredibly high, even given what we now know about their negative impacts. Cities are still segregated by race and income. Self-driving cars could have far-reaching impacts, some we still can't predict. There will be lots for planners to do in the future, and now they have a rich history to reflect on and learn from. Planners, as well as anyone else, can also learn a lot from the more than 25,000 courses over at...
Sorry, that was an ad.
You can go on to the next video, that's just an ad, I think.
Just get out of the way.
They're called land uses because, well, they take up space on urban land. One of the most critical tasks communities must do is help decide where all of these land uses should go. Does a factory belong next to a school or a park instead? How big should those things be? These are questions that land use planning tries to answer. Cities can use lots of different tools to help answer these land use questions, but I'll be talking about the most common ones in this video. They include zoning codes, comprehensive plans, and regional plans. Let's start with one of the most fundamental, zoning. And before I get started, I want to introduce a new series on this channel, the City Beautiful Basics series. This is the first in a series of 5 videos designed to provide you with a baseline of useful knowledge on 5 major planning themes: land use, transportation, the environment, housing, and social justice. These videos will be presented ad-free and are designed for anyone with an interest in planning. Almost every city in the United States has zoning, Houston being one major exception. You might interact with the zoning code when you try to make a simple change to your home, like adding a new room or building a fence. Your city might tell you that you can or can't do those things based on what the zoning code says. In this way, many people see zoning as an annoyance that gets in the way of making personal decisions to change their home. But zoning also shapes entire cities and regions. Let me give you another example. It's probably obvious to you that you can't open up a grocery store in your living room or convert your backyard into an oil refinery. It's only obvious because we all live in a world that zoning has shaped and regulated. The reason you can turn your house into an oil refinery is probably because your house is in a zone that the city government says can have only single-family homes inside, no industry of any kind allowed. Many Americans live in this type of zone, and it's one of the many zones that cities use to regulate how their city looks, functions, and feels. How does zoning work? It fundamentally separates part of a city into zones. Each of these zones has a unique set of rules about what uses can be located there and how dense it can be. Local governments like zoning because it creates a lot of clarity for everyone who owns land, and it saves a lot of work for local government employees. Zoning codes also contain development standards that dictate how tall a building can be in that zone or how much of the lot it can take up. Further zoning code sections contain rules about parking, signage, fencing, and more. It really is a rule book about how a city can be built down to the last little detail. Despite the benefits of zoning codes, there have been numerous calls for reform, as these codes can lead to low-density, car-oriented cities that can cause traffic and generate a lot of carbon emissions. Increasingly, cities are passing reforms to allow for more than one home on lots zoned for single-family housing. Mixed-use zones are being applied to lots more often, too, to allow for different uses to be nearby. These changes can create more vibrant, flexible communities that aren't so car-oriented. Zoning codes are how many people interact with city planning on a regular basis, but the zoning code is a simple tool that implements a broader citywide plan. This plan is sort of a constitution for new growth and development in a community. It's called the comprehensive plan, and we'll talk about comprehensive planning next. This type of planning is essential for managing growth, ensuring sustainable development, and creating livable communities. Like its name suggests, comprehensive planning is comprehensive. It can involve everything. Comprehensive plans tie in transportation, housing, land use, and the environment. It's all bundled in one document created by local policymakers. In this way, it serves as a blueprint for the entire region. All other community plans have to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, even the zoning code. That's why planners think of these plans as constitutions, because they're the ultimate law of the land for planning. Now, comprehensive planning differs between states, and it's not required by the federal government. Each state has their own requirements for what should be in a comprehensive plan. Comprehensive planning is done with extensive community input throughout the process. This can mean community workshops where community members gather to provide input, or city planners going to farmers markets, festivals, schools, and other places where people already are to get feedback on key pieces of the plan. The ultimate goal is to create a plan that has broad support from the entire community. City planners need to be sure to reach out to a representative group of community members. Okay, let's stop talking about comprehensive planning in the abstract and look at a specific example, like this award-winning plan for Charlotte, North Carolina. Charlotte's plan, like most, contains a section on existing conditions. It's important to define a baseline and understand existing strengths and weaknesses before proposing a new path forward. Their plan also includes a description of community values and vision. Every proposed policy needs to be consistent with this overarching vision. The Charlotte 2040 plan then features policies and actions organized around 10 critical community goals, tackling topics from transit and trail-oriented development and housing access for all to the creation of 10-minute neighborhoods citywide. Then the plan includes a map of the land uses in the community. It looks like a zoning map, but is usually broader and less detailed. It usually includes the overall density for each area, as well as a description of the character envisioned. The zoning map has to conform to this land use map. It makes sense for cities to have a big, broad, long-range plan for their future. It gets everyone on the same page about where the city's going, implementing that shared vision, typically developed with a lot of community input. But most of us don't just live in a single city, but instead live in a city that's a part of a broader metropolitan region. Comprehensive plans are for single cities. A different type of planning is needed to coordinate all the cities and suburbs that make up our urban areas. It makes a lot of sense to think about urban challenges at a regional level, since many problems don't respect city limit boundaries. Air pollution certainly doesn't care about boundaries as it wafts through the sky. Traffic doesn't disappear when you cross city limits. And when we think about housing markets, they're usually at the regional level. Regional planning extends beyond the boundaries of a single city and encompasses a broader geographical area, often known as a region or district. In the US, you can think of regions like the Bay Area, Chicagoland, or Greater New York. Metropolitan areas are built using counties. Some regions only consist of one county, while others are made of many. The Bay Area, for example, consists of 9 counties. This type of planning focuses on coordinating land use and transportation decisions across multiple cities and counties within the defined region to promote sustainable and integrated growth. Regional agencies, the bodies responsible for developing regional plans, must include transportation planning in those plans, but may choose to add environmental goals, economic development policies, and anything else that needs considering at the wider regional level. Let's take a look at a regional plan to really understand what's in one. Plan Bay Area 2050, the regional plan for the San Francisco region, is a recent example of a regional plan that takes all sorts of diverse considerations into account. Like the name suggests, the plan has a lofty goal. Imagining all 9 counties of the Bay Area in 2050 in terms of their transportation, housing, economy, and environment. Taking such a big picture look at the Bay, which is home to around 7 million, enables planners to create visions and policies for systems that wouldn't be possible on a city or county level. Think about the freeway system or the local public transportation networks like BART and Caltrain. Plan Bay Area 2050 includes 35 specific strategies to tackle region-wide issues. Many of these strategies have incentives attached to encourage local governments to implement the regional plan. For instance, the plan includes $237 billion for the state to buy currently affordable housing and preserve it for low-income households. Another $389 billion is for restoring and maintaining the existing transportation network, while tens of billions more are set aside for building new transit lines, increasing frequency, and adding capacity. The one trick with regional planning is that the regional agencies that produce them don't have the power to compel the cities within the region to comply with the plan. The regional agencies can't rewrite zoning codes. That's why those grant programs are so important. They can incentivize cities to comply with the plan. Even though regional planning in the United States is weaker than local plans, they still serve to coordinate growing and changing urban areas, and that's no small thing. Coordination is why land use planning is so powerful. It just makes sense to get everyone, decision makers, real estate developers, and residents on the same page about how the future developments will be planned. Comprehensive land use planning can also address so many serious urban issues. Land use planning can provide solutions to climate change, housing unaffordability, social justice, and more. Let's take a look at an example of this. Parking. Parking is one of those land uses that you don't really think about too much. But just about every land use has space for parked cars, and that's a requirement written into the zoning code. Everyone wants to be able to park where they shop or work, but cars are big and they take up a lot of space. All that space for cars spreads out other land uses, which means it's harder to walk and bike. That means more people need to drive, which means more parking. You get the idea. Parking can be a problematic land use and ugly too. Nobody wants to look at it. Now, some cities have abolished parking minimums found in the zoning code to address some of these concerns. These minimums require businesses to have a certain number of parking spaces, but the requirements were often higher than necessary, wasting land and money. Now, real estate developers and communities that have abolished parking minimums can plan for the amount of parking the market needs, not what the planning department needs. This usually results in somewhat smaller parking lots, better optimized for the use on the site. Another major feature of land use planning that's being reconsidered is the separation of uses. Mixing uses can reduce travel times and traffic, decrease carbon emissions, and make for more pleasant, walkable places. The city of Los Angeles recently allowed limited commercial uses in a residential zone in the Boyle Heights neighborhood. This move was largely meant to legalize existing corner stores, which serve as valuable community assets to the local Latino population, but they were illegal under the zoning code. However, this new zoning change might increase walkability or small business ownership, which could be replicated in other neighborhoods and cities. In Seattle, a woman opened a cider tasting room in her garage during the pandemic. Zoning complaints from a neighbor forced her to close it a year later, but the city's introduced zoning reforms like reduced parking requirements to make it easier for people to run businesses out of their homes. Land use is changing, and that's one of the many reasons it's exciting to be a planner today. Planners who do land use are like gardeners. Without them, cities would grow in a haphazard way with weeds crowding out the flowers. Instead, land use planners plant the seeds of a city they want to see in the future.
Slow. Okay. And actually for next month, we'll have another video, and then I'm going to do a presentation on our zoning code for the next month's work session, so.
Any questions about either of those videos? They said the term Euclidean zoning in the first video. Could you please explain that?
So they also mentioned Euclid versus the town of Ambler town of Euclid versus Ambler Realty, which is a major court case that basically stated that zoning was legal and was constitutional. And so what they did was, since it was the town of Euclid, the zoning that they did, and since that case went to the Supreme Court, it's considered Euclidean zoning, the type of zoning they did, primarily that separates uses and things like that.
Could you explain the difference between Euclidean zoning and form-based zoning?
Yeah, so Euclidean zoning is basically what we have in our zoning code, which is it separates uses, but it doesn't really dictate the form of development, whereas form-based codes, to a much minor degree, deal with separation of uses, but primarily what it does is it discusses form. Usually, in some cases, it might be on what we call a transect that goes from, say, rural to downtowns and all the suburban in the middle. But usually it follows changing patterns of development, but it's not so much dealing with land uses. Whereas Euclidean zoning is all about separation of uses and where land uses go in the zoning regulations. But there's also other types of zoning. We won't get into all those, but yeah, those are two main differences. And actually, every zoning code is, in my opinion, is considered a hybrid code, because even though we have primarily a Euclidean zoning here, we have pieces of other types of zoning within them zoning codes, whether it be incentive zoning, whether it's conditional zoning, because conditional zoning is not necessarily Euclidean. It was kind of a type of zoning that was added to Euclidean zoning. So conditional use permits were kind of an add-on. Incentive-based, where we have like certain uses that have to meet certain requirements, say for example like ADUs, that's a type of performance zoning. So there's different types, and I think all zoning codes are somewhat hybrids, but there's also hybrid form-based codes too.
So lots of zoning options out there.
Exactly, and I mean, some people want to just say, hey, it's one size fits all for form-based codes, which it's not. There's a lot of form-based codes out there that I would say are hybrid, that don't meet a certain template that some people try to push. And so, like anything, there's always some people who push a certain template while others do different things.
Thank you.
Okay.
Item B under items for discussion is our short-term rental-related definitions.
Yes. So we talked a little bit about this at the last work session. So I've made some changes to this. A couple things. One is, one comment we did get was about trying to name them instead of saying STR 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to actually name those uses. So I did take a stab at that. So you'll see in here in the draft ordinance that's before you, we did that. So to do the types of short-term rentals, and so I'll go through those really quick here. So if you look at page, it's 7 of 97 in your packet, but page 4 of 8 of the draft ordinance, under short-term rental definition, we got rid of the STR 1 through 5. So we talk about homestays, which are basically a dwelling unit that rents to no more than 2 people, which was STR 1. STR 2 became what I termed it here as a hostel. It means a short-term rental of a sleeping rooms within a dwelling unit, not to exceed 5 guest rooms. That would be the same kind of as a boarding house or boarding and lodging house. I think some folks were thinking that term might be a little obsolete now, so I use the term hostel because it's very similar. Vacation home, we basically went back to that because we do have that in the code today, and this is a rental of an entire dwelling unit, either if the single-family units or 2-family units. And then vacation rental would be rental of dwelling units within a multifamily structure. And then E went back to bed and breakfast, but called it Bed and Breakfast Inn. The reason we use the term inn is if you look at the some of the research and discussion on bed and breakfast inns, it's typically related to there's an operator on site when they call it the bed and breakfast inn type. And so we did keep in here that there must be an operator that resides on site. I also noticed just now that it says STR5 at the end of that sentence, so I will change that to bed and breakfast inn. I just saw that. Correct that. And then the other thing that we did was we defined sleeping rooms. So the discussion of the last meeting was to not have guest room apply to the hostel, but or boarding house, and have it be sleeping room, which is currently discussed in the current definition, but it's not defined. And so I just took a stab at defining sleeping room here in the in this proposed ordinance. And outside of that, that's pretty much the major changes from the previous examples that I provided.
Thank you, Chris. I did happen to notice that there is an STR1 on line 151 that you may want to also make a correction for.
And I found the one on 167, so 151 as well. Okay, I will fix that. Thank you for
And
pointing out.
145.
I didn't catch
There's a
all
couple.
of them. 145.
It's okay. Teamwork
Oh,
makes
I
the
got 'em.
dream work.
Thank you. I will correct those. I knew I was going to miss some by changing that name. I didn't catch all of them, but thank you for pointing those out. Appreciate it.
Any questions?
Anybody have any thoughts on the naming of those types of short-term rentals, or that definition of sleeping room that we talked about the last time? I guess, like I said, that's the major changes from the previous drafts.
The European in me loves the hostel term, so thank you.
Okay. It does seem a more modern term, I guess, but.
Can you repeat that for us, Sean? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think it does apply to sort of beverage, I have more town customers, you know, as that's how we agree to make sense as to what it is.
Okay, I think there's an issue just with internet and whatnot, but it's not relaying what you're saying very well. Sorry about that, Sean.
We got the thumbs up. Would somebody mind briefly summarizing the discussion about identifying these with a name versus the numbers?
I think it's easier for people to put a name to them and try to remember the distinctions between numbers. Like if it's a number 1 versus a number 5, it might be easier for people to understand the different uses or remember what they are based on the name. Certainly, a hostel gives you the idea that there's going to be multiple people to a room potentially. A bed and breakfast inn, certainly. That's basic, that there's an operator, and again, it's renting rooms too, but there's someone who's there operating the facility. So I think when it was discussed previously, the names seemed to be for people to maybe try to more easily differentiate the different types instead of just doing a numbering scheme.
That makes sense. I wasn't here for that, so I wanted to make sure.
But that's why I'm
on the same
asking. I don't
page.
know if all these names do everything you want them to do. If someone has a name that they were thinking about for one of these, again, this is not something that's, it's not a science, it's an art. So there's always different opinions about whether it's good or bad. And again, I appreciate people's input.
Thanks for not including Airbnb.
It's a website. SEMA will tell me it's a website, so I'm not going to put Airbnb in there. So because then someone might be upset if I don't do a VRBO, because they might like VRBO better than Airbnb. So I'm not getting into websites.
My only comment would be I can appreciate the name change and trying to accommodate sort of a laity understanding. From a let's get this through and get it signed, sealed, and delivered is kind of where I come out as well. We've had several discussions on this, and I look forward to having this move forward through the process. Thank you, Chris, for all of your hard work.
Oh, you're welcome. Again, that gets to, I guess, the final question would be, is the commission ready for us to schedule this for a public hearing? And if so, is there a specific date that you're thinking about?
I'm good.
I would definitely like to see it move forward, with keeping in mind anything else that's already on the schedule, but I don't.
We have two
Think-
cases in November. We have a variance case, and we have that street name change for, in Old Harbor that
Oh.
has been filed. And then I think we do have a case in December too, I think it's, I'm trying to think, is it in December? Maybe not. We may have one, I think we may have one in December too, because it came in after the deadline for November. So I think there's a variance in December as well.
Do you happen to know what the assembly's schedule looks like?
Well, the assembly has, currently, they're going to be looking at the work session. I think tomorrow we'll be looking at the child care amendment that you have forwarded to them. And so that's currently in process. So again, that'll be, that following regular meeting would be introduction, and then the regular meeting after that would be for, when we're getting probably further along into November. I think November first meeting is going to be the actual public hearing for that case.
Okay.
There are not very many meetings in December for the assembly. So if we look at this calendar right here, there is one regular meeting in the 18th, and there are a work session, and a regular meeting 3. So I just wanna-
So what if we put it on our regular meeting agenda for November? Just assumed that we could give the public November and December for public comment at our level, and then it would be the first thing that went to the assembly in the new year?
So I'll ask Haley,
us?
so we'll be able to, did we already send the legal ad in for, we have not. So yeah, we should be able to add it to November.
You think that's all right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay.
Okay, we'll add it to the November agenda. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, that takes us to item C, discussion on staff report design.
All right, so when iCompass published this agenda, you'll notice what you have before you, there's a bunch of yellow boxes. And that's comments that I wrote, but for whatever reason, when it publishes an iCompass for you all, the PDF, it doesn't actually show those. So I'm gonna have Haley put those up on the screen here, and hopefully she'll be able to read them for you. I won't be able to, so she can read those comments. So what I've done here and what you have in your agenda packet is a copy of a previous staff report from ¡24. I have some comments associated with different sections of things that, at the very least, based on the zoning practice that's also attached, and also looking at other comments about how you make staff reports a little easier to read and understand, and use of illustrations and maps and things like that. So we did those comments, and then we looked at any comments that you all have about things you want us to look at, and then give us some direction. Do you want us to look at bringing forward some changes in formatting or organization of the staff report? So I'm gonna go through, or Haley will go through those comments. There's not a lot of them, just a few of those yellow boxes. So I'll have her go through those, and then we can talk about if there's what you all think about those comments, and also if you have additional comments.
Am I good?
Yes, please.
So the first comment is better use of headers and distinguishing between administrative information such as case number, applicant, and location versus actual requested action and size location data such as zoning, size, current use, proposed use, and legal description. The next comment is better separation between various data. Also include a summary of recommendation on first page of report so that public can see the recommendation without having to review all technical analysis. This comment is to create a more structured report that separates out comprehensive plan analysis of area, application review by relevant code sections into its own area, staff recommendation in its own section. Does the commission want the full code section and text listed, or would a listing of each section with a hyperlink to code section work?
Do you want us to real-time?
If you want to stop as she goes through them, if you have a comment, I'd be happy to listen.
So I do like the linkage out to the web link, simply because that helps integrate the ability to let the person do their research as to what code says specifically and explicitly. And it takes up less space if you're having to quote it inside of the report.
Yeah, and we could hyperlink to very specific sections too, so it doesn't have to be just like to a certain chapter or whatever. We can go to very individual codes. We can't go to a line, but we could go to an individual code section, so.
Yes, I would like to see that drill down.
Okay,
I would agree with that.
okay.
I would also agree with maybe having a summary at the beginning.
Okay.
I think that was maybe the second.
That's a
The
very-
summary of the recommendation.
Right. It's a
Yeah,
very
okay.
salient document, a clean document, kind of like an executive brief. You review the first single page, and that's
Yeah,
good.
and the reason you see that is because there's different people, different audiences for staff reports. It's not all just for the commission. The public reads them, and they may want to just get to like a quick summary of what the recommendation is, and not so much our full technical analysis.
Thank you.
So under suggested motions, does the commission like having a motion listed in report, or would you rather have that just be in the agenda statement? So right now it's listed twice.
Does everybody understand what that question is? We have your
Yeah, I'm
agenda
just trying to
statement in
decide.
iCompass, and a lot of times it'll have a recommendation, and that recommendation will have the recommended motions in there, and would say, you know, if you don't agree with the motion, this is what you have to do, versus having it there, but also having it in the report, and whether you think that's like, it just makes the reports longer, and it's just, you know, kind of duplication that's not needed. And that was kind of our question.
I don't really have a preference, I don't think. I'd love to hear from everyone else, though.
I think what I'd like to see is this be a hyperlink to, on the very first page, of suggested motions, the one for and one against. So that way you can quickly access it from a commissioner's perspective. I'd want to be able to start to understand what my options are, and so I'd want to go see those as well as quickly as possible. I understand that it's probably buried within this staff report, but easy access can be
Yeah, because
useful.
in your agenda statement, especially if you're looking online, so if you're looking on a computer or an iPad, it's going to be just embedded into that agenda, and then when you get in there, there's that beginning page before you even get to the staff report, before you get to any of the attachments, there will be, you know, there's a description, there's a discussion, and then we get into a recommendation, and that recommendation is usually where it is. And then when you go through your staff report, it'll be in there, but it's typically towards the end. And so it's, you know, there's double duty there, and I guess that, you know, our concern would be, I don't know if we can do a hyperlink back to that first page, but at the very least, we would, because if you're doing it through your computer, you just do a back button to get back to the main page, and you would be right there with the recommendation.
Part of my learning curve has been understanding where these motions are within the packet. So just having one is very useful. No need to have a second set is where I come out.
And real quick, since I have it on here, when you do split screen or looking at the agenda, you can go, each item has a cover page, and they look like this. Some of them aren't filled out, but typically the recommendation is listed right here. And so that is the easiest place to find it for each agenda item, just so everyone knows where to go.
Again, some of those, for example, when we're doing work session items like this, there's not going to be anything on that page. But when it's say a variance case, there will be something under the recommendation that would be the recommended motion and things like that. Okay.
I'm fine with whatever staff thinks makes the most sense.
Again, we can, you know, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, get some examples, And then we can always try it out, and if you feel that you want to have it back in the report, we could always go back to doing that. So there's nothing set in stone there.
So, under findings of fact, findings are important to remain in staff recommendation. Do you want the staff to have potential alternative findings and motions available in case the commission does not agree with staff's recommendations?
I would like to hear everyone else's comments before I respond.
I don't foresee that happening, but I guess if it does, then yeah, we probably would want to have.
And we've done alternate motions with an opposition. Typically, it's been one where we can easily do that. For example, staff might be recommending supporting a case, but there might be something in there, for example, if it's a rezone and it doesn't fit the future land use map, you may easily be able to do an alternate resolution that's for denial to just say it doesn't meet the land use map, and that's why you're recommending denial. Staff might be in support of it for other reasons, and that might be why there's a resolution in support. But the way I would say is that's somewhat rare, you'll see that, and that may only be for cases like rezones, because I can see variance cases, depending on what kind of variance it is, it's going to be hard, unless it's something, because if it was that cut and dry for staff to recommend have a recommendation of denial, we would just recommend denial, right? So we wouldn't be recommending approval. And then, depending on what kind of variance it is, also if there's multiple kind of dimensional variances they're going for in the same resolution, which you could see, the commission may agree with 2 of them and not the 3rd one. And so how you write that up and do the findings on that's going to be interesting, and it may require you to give us direction. And as you're allowed in your bylaws, we can go back the next meeting with a substitute resolution that would be for denial. So you do have options. If we don't have, say you want to deny a variance that staff supported, there is no alternative resolution, and you would just have to come up with findings and it just really has to be one of the criteria that it's not meeting for a variance to be denied. So it's not, all of them. So you could do that. My suggestion would be, just so that the wording is correct, is that you could give us direction about how you want us to write a finding that's for denial, and then you can just postpone or basically defer action on the case to the next meeting, and then we can present to you that new resolution.
So my particular perspective, hearing that now, Chris, is that if there is a different direction the commission will want to go, to have the breadcrumb to coach us on how to do an alternative or request additional information, it would be useful, just as a standard template that we can access should we decide not to go with the staff recommendation.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, one of the questions that Bronwyn suggested to me to ask all of you for training. I wasn't going to do it this month just because we have training for next month, would be is there additional trainings you want to go over? One of the things we could do is go over the different types of review criteria for different cases. So for a variance versus a conditional use permit and so on, we could go over those, and we can talk about some options for what do you do if you wanted to deny a case and how you would recommend that. So we could do some training on that.
I think perhaps maybe reviewing some case studies too for some Alaska land use law cases that have been heard. When I think about things like findings of fact, I always think about the reason that they're there. And it's because these kinds of cases do end up in court. And maybe I'm a little biased because I used to be a land use planning professional. But I think that if the commission is going to not take the advice of a professional staff that knows state regulations, that knows the code, that knows previous landmark land use law cases, that it should be incumbent on the commission to really outline why. That's not to say that staff can't help, but I think it's a very slippery slope if every case that comes in here has an easy yes or an easy no that's being put on a platter for us by some folks who are supposed to be, helping us make a definitive decision and guiding us in the right direction based on our code and our state regulations. So I think that just utilizing our ability to postpone or even take a recess, just take a couple minutes for everybody to scribble their thoughts down on a piece of paper or use a template. Like you've said, you can provide a blank template that everybody uses for motions that they're going to make or things like that aren't catered to every single case, that are just generic. I think there's ways that we can get through the process if we in fact don't agree with staff, that don't require staff to say, well, if you agree, then we can say this, and if you don't agree, then we can say this. I think that creates a gray area that I don't really know that we want to live in.
Well, and I will say this, small commissions like this throughout Alaska don't have their attorneys sitting in those meetings. Your larger commissions and larger communities will have city attorneys, or they may have a larger city attorney office that would be sitting through those commission meetings and will be able to provide advice kind of on the fly at the meeting. So the ability to be able to postpone your action, or in this case, defer action, where you're not opening it up again for a public hearing at the next meeting, to allow you to direct staff to a certain point, and staff, if they feel there's some legal issues there, have the ability to run it past the borough attorney. So that gives you some flexibility, and it certainly gives you hopefully some reassurance that if there is some concerns there, that by postponing to the next month, it gives us plenty of time to write it up correctly as we see that we think might work, and then if we think there's some legal question, we have time to consult the attorney. You want to go on to, you have any more, or is that the last one?
Was that the last comment?
Or is that
No,
the-
it
there's
looks
last
like
one.
there's one more comment. Oh, actually, I don't know how many more. But so far, this one is for the photos. Do you like photos and plan images, if applicable, at the end, or would you like to see these available in pertinent sections such as project or application summary and staff analysis review section? Do you like data in tables instead of bullet points?
And again, that may not be here. I think this is the last one. It's at the end of the report. So you'll have some, for example, you'll see, for example, when we look at surrounding land uses, some reports have them in tables instead of just like a list. Oh,
I know that mutes me. How do I mute him? There we go.
so there's some like that. For your photographs and your maps in particular, we can set up the document where the maps could go in specific places. Think about where we talk about land use, there might be a map that has land use shown on it. Where we talk about zoning, the map might be associated where we talk about zoning instead of having them all at the end. Photographs could be interspersed throughout the report when we're talking about maybe the location. Say it's a variance case, we want to show you a photo of where the variance is located, and we're talking about that variance. It might be good to be able to have the photo right there instead of having you have to scroll at the end. So there's things like that we can do. We just have to organize the document in a certain way to do it.
I always like pictures. Sorry to cut you off there, Tracy. Go ahead.
I like pictures too. I'm pretty visual. So when you're talking about like a certain project, I would like to have the picture like right there. And then, but I mean, I can look at the back too, but it's definitely easier.
And that being said, I also see the discretion of when crafting the narrative that a salient picture at the right time would be useful in the description. So I would rather let staff have that flexibility to make that discernment. More pictures are, of course, better, in my viewpoint. No
Yeah,
pun-
for example, when we have preliminary plans, there's images of those could be in specific places, particularly in the analysis is usually a good place to put those. Same thing if we have a conditional use permit that has a conditional use permit plan with them or sketch, having that in the discussion section instead of waiting to have it at the end may be helpful to answer questions as you read it, those kind of things. It's just, I think it's easier to stick them all at the end because you don't have to worry about how you wrap text around it and things like that and, you know, formatting organization. But if you create a template that has that done already, then it makes it easier.
I like the idea of that. You guys feel like that's a worthwhile change?
Yeah, but I also don't mind scrolling down to look at the pictures. I'm more visual, so I always tend to scroll down first, I feel like, to look and see if there's any pictures, and then I go back.
I do that too.
Yeah, I often find myself going to Maps, the Maps app, and
Yeah.
figure out where this is at.
Well, if we put it in the text, we make you have to read it then, right? If we put it in there.
I look at all the pictures first. It's a good primer.
All right, well, I think that's good direction. We'll work on some examples and bring those to the next work session and follow up on this discussion, so thank you. Oh,
Something that you guys all might want to consider is that instead of the packet coming over to you guys as case number like it is down there, that things are separated in that packet. So the staff report is a separate attachment in the packet so that you can click on the staff report and just read the staff report. You can click on the thing that says letters, then see all the letters that went out, and anything that came in, or, you know, separating it all so that it's easier for you guys to read it and be able to click back and forth on the attachments. Just a suggestion, but something you might want to think about.
and it's something we can look at and talk to the clerk's office a little bit, because I think we'd have to tweak our template a little bit for that, but in terms of iCompass, but I don't see why we couldn't
No,
do
because
that.
it's just like they do for the assembly with all the different
Oh, okay.
attachments.
Okay, well, then if they can do it for the assembly, they should be able to do it for us. We just have to talk
Well-
to them about that.
Are you talking about like seeing the different sections of the case or specifically in the staff report?
So just like when you have your case number and you have all of those different attachments, right? And then you make it into one packet. Instead of making it into one packet, you would list each one of those attachments as an attachment. You would attach it into your iCompass, just as a deal, and then it comes out with each one of those things underneath. You're already there. You're already set up to do it exactly the way that super easy.
Okay, I will look at the assembly agendas and talk to the clerks and see how
Yeah, I
it
think
works.
it may be easy to do. If they're able to do it, we should be able to do it. It just might have to tweak what iCompass does for us.
So it sounds like this is a iCompass software understanding, sort of some
I think so.
maximizing
Yeah.
our potential with this product.
Yeah.
I will say that I have had training on iCompass since the second week I got hired, actually, and we have monthly clerk meetings to go over any questions, so I'm actively getting better at our software.
And it
Okay.
shows, and I thank you for your service for that.
Haley, that little thing that you just popped out, we can't see that on ours, right? 'Cause that-
I believe that you can. So right now I have it set up as split screen. I will go to a new page.
This is an iCompass, correct?
Yes. So if you go to iCompass, you don't even need to log in to view it. And you look at the agenda packet, then it has the agenda, and then you can click on each packet, and it does have the table of contents. It's just in the far left-hand corner, so it's not always noticeable, and it doesn't have a label. It took me a while to figure
And
out
if
where
you
that
can
is.
Scroll back to that page you were just on, so that gets back to what Seema just said. So if you go back to that page you were just on, and you have like the links to the actual item, we're talking about being able to have individual attachments under that item that you could click on. So instead of clicking on the overall agenda item and all the attachments as one big document, you can click on each individual piece under there. So that's what we're talking, that's what Seema was talking about.
Yeah, this is a software, maximizing our software potential.
Okay.
All right, well, that was our last item for discussion. So we'll head on to packet review. We have one public hearing scheduled for this month. Case number 25-008, a parking variance. Chris, can we have a staff report on that, please?
Yes, thank you. And I just noticed, Haley, I did notice something on here on the subject line.
The 3 and 2.
It should be 4 and 2. Because the requirement is 4 and the request is 2. So I noticed that on the, because it's correct in the discussion, it's just not correct in that subject line.
Yeah, that is my apologies.
But it is correct in the discussion for the, and in the staff report.
And for next week's meeting, it will be correct.
Okay, so I just want to point that out. So the original request that was to you was a requirement of 5 to 2. A little bit of changes in the request based on some of the changes of how much storage and things like that. And so it's a requirement today is what's required is 4, and they're asking to have that reduced to 2 off-street parking spaces. Staff hasn't changed our recommendation in support of this, primarily because, again, this is a phased project to create the museum. And so what we're talking right now on the current building and property that they own, that's been transferred to them, it's administrative space. So it's not actually space where people are going to be coming looking at exhibits or anything yet. But it's administrative space. It's still a museum use, but it's going to be happening in phases. And so when we get to the lot, when they get that lot that they're going to do the exhibits in, they'll have to get a zoning compliance permit for the change of use, and we'll have to address parking there. At this time, having only 2 off-street parking spaces for this, staff feels is comfortable with that, just because we're talking about phasing in, and the current portion of the property, what that building is going to be used for, is not the full-blown museum yet, where we're talking about having visitors coming there. It's mainly going to be administrative space as they get prepared to completely, in phases, create the museum. So I just wanted to summarize that. I know we talked about this before in a previous meeting, and I just wanted to kind of give you our thoughts on it, because you're talking 3 lots that were rezoned. We're talking about really the middle lot right now that was transferred to them with 1 structure on it. That's going to be administrative space. The property, when that gets transferred, it's at the corners, my understanding, is going to be where the actual museum, where you have exhibits and you would have visitors coming there to visit. And I'm not positive what the other parcel on the right-hand side would be, but again, those would need zoning compliance permits at the time and would have to comply with parking requirements unless they asked for another variance or a revised parking variance. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer those. You also have Toby Sullivan in the audience too, who's the applicant for the museum.
Do you want to come up, Toby, and add anything?
I think Chris summarized the project pretty well. I don't really have anything to add, but I'm available for questions.
Perfect, thanks.
I have a question. Are you going to put your boat there? No. The boat stays down at the harbor, right?
The boat is where the boat's going to be.
I was
Unless
just
there's a
wondering.
tsunami.
Fair. Very fair.
I did have a question for Toby regarding future parking. What's any idea of what your capacity for clientele coming through and the need for parking? Any speculation?
We haven't thought that far. I think we're going to take it step by step, and that's about as far as we could do at this point.
Well, then, as step by step goes, I have no problems in making the adjustments to accommodate for the growth of this museum, as I see it as a treasure of our community. Thank you, Toby.
Thank you.
I do too. I wanted to comment that I did notice when the cruise ships were in that they were all down there looking at your boat.
The cruise ship traffic, yeah, we also
Yeah.
do harbor tours. That's been a big part of our fundraising, and that
That's
Thelma
awesome.
Sea has become quite a tourist draw. Yeah.
Very nice.
Any other questions or comments on this case? No? Okay. Thank you so much for being here, Toby. That is the only case that we have on our agenda for next week. Our meeting schedule is here under reports. We've got our meeting next Wednesday, which is the 15th of October, and then we have a work session scheduled for Wednesday, November 12th, both at 6:30 p.m. and both here in Assembly Chambers. Let's move on to staff comments.
Yeah, so I'll let you know, we do have the final plat in for preliminary review for the Kodiak subdivision. If you remember, that was in Old Harbor. That was the building that had the seafood processing location, so that one has come in. We also actually have the draft plat to look at for, or final plat for the tsunami subdivision, but again, that's dependent on the approval of the street name change, which will be going in November. But if that is approved, then they'll be able to go forward and get that final plat approved and recorded. In addition, I'll let the commissioners know we did have an open house today from 10 to 2 in this room regarding parks, recreation, open space, and trails. We had about 13, 14 people join us during the day, off and on, through the process, and provide us taking questionnaires and providing some information to us on trails and park and open space facilities in the borough. And so we appreciate that. And we also want to just remind everyone that the trail survey is still on the borough's website for the Plan 2045 website, which I believe for the commission has been submitted to the, you all have received that email address, or that, excuse me, that website location. We'll make sure to have it again in the director's report for next week's meeting, so it'll be attached there, the link to get to it. And we're going to keep that open until the end of October. Our next section after this will be getting into economic development. And so that will be a lot of work back to, like, similar to what we did for land use and housing. The economic development section is a pretty, I wouldn't say strenuous section, but it's a section that requires a lot of work, a lot of input from various sources, and we will be probably having more than one open house for that, and more, outreach, and maybe additional, we even have surveys that are broken up, or questionnaires that are broken up online into different segments of the economy. So we haven't decided on that part yet, but we know what we need to do more outreach for that section than we did on some of the others. And with that said, unless you have any questions, that's all I have for right now.
Okay. Haley, do you have anything for us?
I would just like to state a couple things for the record. Miss Williamson did end up coming to the meeting at 6:44 p.m. Also, I believe Mr. Cleary had to leave early due to job obligations. Other than that, I just want to say thank you guys for bearing with me for some of my minor mistakes I have made. I will hopefully avoid future ones.
I've made a couple mistakes in my day too.
Not me.
You're among friends. Okay, that gets us down to commissioner comments. Let's start with Athena's this time.
I apologize. It's been a very long day. But I'm glad I made it. I will be listening and watching the beginning of that video that I missed. So again, my apologies for my tardiness. Also, Nick wanted me to tell you he tried to log in and couldn't, but that should be his last meeting for the year, so hopefully he'll be at the next couple meetings. Thank you.
Appreciate your attitude, trying to improve everything. Chris, working on efficiency and all that stuff there. Your guys' hard work's appreciated. Thank you.
Ms. Tracy?
Oh, I did take the trail survey. There was a lot of trails that I never heard of, which kind of surprised me because I've lived here a long time. But and I didn't see a map, but that's fine. I'll just look them up myself.
Yeah, we had the map was here for the open house. You would probably be unable to read it. Unfortunately, if we had it just online, you could read it, but having it in that software, which you would think, since it's based on GIS software, they would make it easy for you to be able to go into that map and do stuff. But unfortunately, for a map as large as that trails map was, you would not have been able to probably read most of it, or they all kind of blended together at the scale that we would have to use.
I was surprised at how many we have. I was surprised, and that was a lot of work. Thank you so much. I like the videos. They were very informative. Thank you.
Haley, no need to apologize. You're learning, just like all of us, and I learn every day. All right, so Chris, thank you again for your reports and for your critiques and advising us. I look forward to us moving forward the public's agenda and for the coming closure of this year. It's amazing what we've accomplished this year. Thank you.
Last quarter of the year. It's kind of mind-blowing, right? Definitely thank you to staff. I also feel like we've gotten a lot accomplished this year. Thank you to everyone that made time to vote yesterday. And if you didn't make time to vote yesterday, go ahead and put the next election date on your calendar and make sure to be there for that, because it's important. It's your right. It's also your obligation under our current form of government. So exercise your right to vote. With that, let's go ahead and adjourn at 7:46. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Sarah.